Hey guys, Brockshot here, back with you with the next video in our series, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Great Expectations. I wish to say something respecting this escape. It may prevent some persons laying under suspicion a longer me. You can say what you like, returned the sergeant, standing coolly looking at him with his arms folded. But you have no call to say it here. You'll have opportunity enough to say about it and hear about it before it's done with, you know. I know, but this is another pint, a separate matter. A man can't starve. At least I can't. I took some wittles up at the village over yonder, where the church stands amost out on the marshes. You mean Stow, said the sergeant. And I'll tell you where from. From the blacksmith's. Halloa, said the sergeant, staring at Joe. Halloa, Pip, said Joe, staring at me. It was some broken victuals, and that's what it was, and a dram of liquor, and a pie. Have you happened to miss such an article as a pie, blacksmith? Asked the sergeant confidently. My wife did, at the very moment when you came in. Don't you know, Pip? So, said my convict, turning his eyes to Joe in a moody manner, and without the least glance at me. So you're the blacksmith, are you? Then I'm sorry to say I've eat your pie. God knows you're welcome to it, so far as it was ever mine, returned Joe, with the saving remembrance of Mrs. Joe. We don't know what you have done, but we wouldn't have you starved to death for it, poor miserable fellow creep. Would us, Pip? The something that I had noticed before clicked in the man's throat again, and he turned his back. The boat had returned, and his guard were ready, so we followed him to the landing place made of rough stakes and stones, and saw him put into the boat, which was rowed by a crew of convicts like himself. No one seemed surprised to see him, or interested in seeing him, or glad to see him, or sorry to see him, or spoke a word, except that somebody in the boat growled as if two dogs. Give way, you! Which was the signal for the dip of the oars. By the light of the torches, we saw the black hulk lying out a little way from the mud of the shore, like a wicked Noah's Ark, cribbed and barred and moored by massive rusty chains. The prison ship seemed in my young eyes to be ironed like the prisoners. We saw the boat go alongside, and we saw him taken up the side and disappear. Then the ends of the torches were flung hissing into the water, and went out as if it were all over with him. Chapter 6. My state of mind regarding the pilfering from which I had been so unexpectedly exonerated did not impel me to frank disclosure, but I hope it had some dregs of good at the bottom of it. I do not recall that I felt any tenderness of conscience in reference to Mrs. Joe, when the fear of being found out was lifted off me. But I loved Joe, perhaps for no better reason in those early days than because the dear fellow let me love him. And, as to him, my inner self was not so easily composed. It was much upon my mind, particularly when I first saw him looking about for his file, that I ought to tell Joe the whole truth. Yet I did not, and for the reason that I was mistrusted that if I did, he would think me worse than I was. The fear of losing Joe's confidence, and of thenceforth sitting in the chimney corner at night, staring drearily at my forever lost companion and friend, tied up my tongue. I morbidly represented to myself that if Joe knew it, I never afterwards could see him at the fireside feeling his fair whisker, without thinking that he was meditating on it. That, if Joe knew it. I never afterwards could see him glance, however casually, at yesterday's meat or pudding, when it came on to day's table, without thinking that he was debating whether I had been in the pantry. That if Joe knew it, and any subsequent period of our joint domestic life remarked that his beer was flat or thick, the conviction that he suspected tar in it would bring a rush of blood to my face. In a word, I was too cowardly to do what I knew to be right, as I had been too cowardly to avoid doing what I knew to be wrong. I had had no intercourse with the world at that time, and I imitated none of its many inhabitants who act in this manner. Quite an untaught genius, I made the discovery of the line of action for myself. As I was sleepy before we were far away from the prison ship, Joe took me on his back again and carried me home. He must have had a tiresome journey of it, for Mr. Wopsle, being knocked up, was in such a very bad temper that if the church had been thrown open, he would probably have excommunicated the whole expedition, beginning with Joe and myself. In his lay capacity, he persisted in sitting down in the damp to such an insane extent that when his coat was taken off to be dried at the kitchen fire, the circumstantial evidence on his trousers would have hanged him if it had been a capital offense. By that time, I was staggering on the kitchen floor like a little drunkard, through having been newly set upon my feet, and through having been fast asleep, and through waking in the heat and lights and noise of tongues, as I came to myself. With the aid of a heavy thumb between the shoulders and the restorative exclamation, "Yah! Was there ever such a boy as this?" from my sister, I found Joe telling them about the convict's confession, and all the visitors suggesting different ways by which he had got into the pantry. Mr. Pumblechook made out, after carefully surveying the premises, that he had first got upon the roof of the forge, and had then got upon the roof of the house, and had then let himself down the kitchen chimney by a rope made of his bedding cut into strips. And as Mr. Pumblechook was very positive and drove his own chaise cart over everybody, it was agreed that it must be so. Mr. Wopsle, indeed, wildly cried out, "No!" with the feeble malice of a tired man. As he had no theory, and no coat on, he was unanimously set at naught. Not to mention his smoking hard behind, as he stood with his back to the kitchen fire to draw the damp out, which was not calculated to inspire confidence. This was all I heard that night before my sister clutched me as a slumberous offense to the company's eyesight, and assisted me up to bed with such a strong hand that I seemed to have 50 boots on, and to be dangling them all against the edges of the stairs. My state of mind, as I have described it, began before I was up in the morning, and lasted long after the subject had died out, and had ceased to be mentioned saving on exceptional occasions. Chapter 7. At the time when I stood in the churchyard, reading the family tombstones, I had just enough learning to be able to spell them out. My construction, even of their simple meaning, was not very correct, for I read, "Wife of the above," as a complimentary reference to my father's exaltation to a better world. And if any one of my deceased relations had been referred to as below, I have no doubt I should have formed the worst opinions of that member of the family. Neither were my notions of the theological positions to which my catechism bound me at all accurate, for I have a lively remembrance that I supposed my declaration that I was to walk in the same all the days of my life laid me under an obligation always to go through the village from our house in one particular direction, and never to vary it, by turning down the wheelwright's or up by the mill. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.